Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the top 10 Craftworld Eldar units in 10th edition. Now, I wanted to wait to do this video until after the nerfs came out because, we all knew that there were going to be some nerfs and they would probably target the Eldar. I didn't know exactly what they would be, so I figured I'd wait on this list. But now, since the nerfs are done and over with, the nerf bat is swung and we are, for now, in the clear. And I have to say, even after the nerfs, I think Eldar are going to be very strong. We have some of the strongest, most well-rounded units in the game. A lot of them are very usable. In fact, I haven't really found a single unit besides the flyers in the Codex that are completely unusable, which is a lot better than last edition. Remember, last edition we had probably a fourth of the Codex that was unusable, and then a lot of units were just not that good. There were ways to make them good, but they just unfortunately didn't compare well to the other units that were available. Now, on the other hand, we have kind of the opposite problem. We have too many units that are so good that they compete very well with each other. So making a list like this can kind of be a little bit tough because a lot of units in the Eldar Codex have a place within your army that may not, in fact, make it on this list. So this is the top 10 Craftworld Eldar units in 10th edition. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. So what we're going to be doing today is going to be ranking the top 10 Eldar units from the Eldar Index and analyzing them. And then just keep in mind also that these placements are subjective. These are my opinions, but for the most part, I think they're pretty accurate. I think that regardless of how you rank them 1 to 10, I think all of these deserve to be in the top 10 in some way. Okay, so coming in at number 10 is the Viper. So the Viper obviously is a very good utility tool. It's very fast, has a small profile, so it's easy to hide. It can carry a bright lance, which makes it really good with unparalleled mastery. And enemy units hit by it lose the benefit of cover for the turn. So the rest of your army shooting at it, it basically won't get the benefit of cover from them, which is an extremely powerful tool to have in your army. It's just like last edition, you would always have a Warlock with the reveal and conceal ability, right? You'd always have a Warlock Skyrunner with that so you can rip cover away from an enemy. Well, this is basically your Warlock Skyrunner now. And it's a Warlock Skyrunner with a Bright Lance, so it can deal with enemy tanks. Its Shuriken Catapult can, hit enemy infantry if you need to remove cover from those units. And even though it is 75 points, it's fairly respectable for its cost as far as the damage it can do and the utility it brings to the table. Now, it does have a 75-point price tag, which is why I decided to put it in 10th, just because of the fact that damage-wise, it doesn't really compete with the other options in our Codex. For example, a Fire Prism is basically 2 of these, right? And a Fire Prism not only does a lot of damage against tanks, but can also do some damage to infantry as well. And I know that that is not exactly the Viper's role in the list, but if you compare it damage-wise to other units, it does fall a little bit short, and that's why I ended up putting it in 10th place. But it was very close, I have to say, because I love the Viper. I've been using it in my games, and it's done really well for what it is. Coming in 9th place is the Night Spinner. So the Night Spinner is a very powerful utility tool. It has indirect fire with devastating wounds, twin linked, and blast. So even though it is firing at -1 ballistic skill when out of line of sight, it is doing a significant amount of damage to infantry when it does hit. It also has 2 wounds, or damage 2, I should say, so that, even marine targets can take a few casualties from this thing. And of course, the devastating wounds and twin linked ability is very powerful as well because, as you guys know, 6 of the wound will cause mortal wounds. The big thing about this, though, isn't the damage, it's the ability, which tags an enemy unit hit with -2 movement and cannot advance. I cannot stress enough how good this ability is if you get the first turn and are able to stop an enemy from getting onto an objective. This is pretty massive, especially against slower armies. It can make them really, really slow. Chaos armies tend to run big blocks of Terminators with supporting characters in them. Guess what? Those things are very slow to begin with. I think they're speed 5. So tagging them with a -1 or -2, on their movement profile, making them movement 3 and they can't advance, means they probably won't get to the midboard until at least turn 3. which is pretty insane if you think about it. And that also means their scary 24-inch weapons will have a lot less threat range, so you can have more space on the table to maneuver and get around Overwatch. So the Night Spinner, in my mind, is one of the best units in the Eldar Codex because not only can it do some decent damage, but it can also tag enemy units with a very powerful speed debuff, which can turn the course of the game. Coming in at 8th is probably one of my favorite units personally, just because it serves me so well in 9th edition, as it did most of you, and they look so freaking cool. I mean, look at them. Snipers on the back of jet bikes. When this unit first came out, I was laughing my ass off. I was like, there is no way this is a realistic unit. There is no way this is going to be good, right? These guys look absolutely absurd when you think about it in a logical way. But then again, I have to admit, why am I trying to put logic into a sci-fi fantasy game where there's 8-foot-tall superhumans and crafty space elves, right? And with that suspension of disbelief, I soon started to run the Shroud Runners myself and found out that they were really good. And they are really good in 10th edition as well. They have a blistering amount of anti-infantry firepower that with buffs can threaten even heavier targets. Blade Storm is a great ability to put on a unit of 6 of these guys if you just want to mow down enemy infantry. Their sniper rifles as well have precision, so can take out characters and units and offer a little bit of utility and extra damage. They're very fast, and they have Scout 9, so they can get into a better position in the beginning of the game, even if you want to run them as a minimum unit, as a marker, you know, to mark targets. They're very effective in that role, and they're only 80 points for 3. Which, by the way, is the same cost as 3 Wind Riders with scatter lasers. So yeah, you can take Wind Riders in groups of 9. They're a little bit easier to hide with their small bases, but point for point, these guys hit a lot harder because they do have the additional Ranger long rifles in addition to their scatter lasers. They can also mark a target within 12 inches to give your other units lethal hits when shooting it. Now, this is a really good ability because it allows your units that would normally not be able to scratch tough targets. And there's a lot of high toughness infantry in this game, guys. There's a lot of toughness 6, sometimes even toughness 7 infantry. Like if you look at Custodes have some pretty serious tough infantry. You know, I'm talking toughness 7, 2+ save infantry that has 4 wounds apiece. Pretty insane. But if you have something like Shroud Runners, it can make it a lot easier to deal with. And if your opponent overestimates their toughness, they can find themselves into, well, a really bad position with a really expensive unit. Let's just put it that way. So Shroud Runners overall have great damage. They have great utility. And they have the speed to be able to do other things in the game besides just mark targets. So they're a very versatile unit, and I really like them, and that's why I have them in the top 10. Okay, so 7th place is the Hornet. So the Hornet I was immediately impressed by when I saw the Forge World points reveals because, man, is this thing good. It can take 2 Eldar heavy weapons, just like it always could. Bright Lances or Star Cannons seem the best to me. I think the Pulse Lasers are a little bit swingy. They're strength 9 AP2, but D3 damage. I don't really like the D3 damage profile because you could whiff, and I always seem to whiff on D3 damage. So personally, I would rather take the Star Cannons on that one, give them a little bit more AP, a little bit more anti-infantry firepower, or if you want to take Bright Lances, that's a great choice as well. It has an ability, when it moves over an enemy, and this is when it makes a normal move, you roll 6 dice, and on each 4+, you deal a mortal wound to non-vehicle, non-monster units. It has speed 14 or movement 14, so it has a pretty good movement range. And on top of that, you can proc this ability multiple times in a single turn by using Fire and Fade. So yeah, Fire and Fade is 2 command points, a little bit pricey, but if you need those extra mortal wounds in the late game, sometimes that could be the difference between clearing an enemy off an objective and not being able to do so. And that, to me, is just worth its weight in gold. An ability that you can keep in your back pocket, that you can make your enemy think about, and that does mortal wounds on top of it. So not only can your opponent not get an armor save, but they can't get an invul save, and things like toughness and, you know, hit modifiers are all irrelevant. And it's also a little bit more durable than the Viper. So has a little bit more durability, has double the firepower that a Viper can have, and has a damage ability. So I put this thing in 7th just because at 80 points, I think this thing is really cost effective. I think it has a great ability that you can keep in your back pocket to keep your enemy on your toes. And obviously it does have a little bit of a smaller profile than something like a Falcon or a Fire Prism, so you can hide it a little bit easier. And all those factors put this thing in 7th for me. It's just a great unit, but good luck finding it on the Forge World website after those reveals. Because man, is this thing expensive, and count yourself lucky if you have one. I've been looking for one for a couple weeks now, and I haven't found anything under $80. So, you know, this thing is pretty pricey. If you can find one for cheap, definitely grab one up. Check your local consignment cases and things like that. You might just get lucky. All right, so coming in at 6th, it could be none other than the Autarch Wayleaper. So the Autarch Wayleaper gives you 1 command point during each of your command phases. I think that is alone in and of itself an auto include in every single Eldar army. But if it was just that, I probably wouldn't include him. This guy does a lot more for you as well. So he also has the lone operative ability, which makes him really hard to target outside of 12 inches. And he also gives +1 to leadership and battle shock tests within 6. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, Proxy Hammer, this is good, but it's not top 10, is it? Guys, in every single game that I've played, aside from the command reroll, that aura has come in handy. And I'll tell you why. Because of our new fate dice system where we can only use 1 a phase, we are really incentivized to use fate dice for things like battle shock tests to make sure we pass them. There have been several games where I've had that my opponent whittles my Guardian Defenders down to like 3 or 4 models, and they have to take a battle shock test. And with this guy right near them, instead of having to use a 5 to guarantee a pass, I only have to use a 4 on my fate dice. And you guys know now how important 5s and 6s are now that we can only use 1 per phase. So not only does it give you a better chance of passing in the first place, just in general, even without fate dice, but it eases the load of your important fate dice as well. So that's pretty strong. Now, lastly, he does have decent weapon options, even though they're not the strongest. You take a Dragon Fusion Gun on him, you take a Starglaive on him, and he can do some pretty good damage against light infantry, or maybe even heavy infantry like Assault Marines. Now, the reason I like this is because if you keep him in the back, he's a good deterrent for small throwaway units like Jump Pack Marines. Right? A lot of my opponents like to run interference with small units like that in the backfield, bring them from reserve, and now that reserves can come in on your table edge, that's right, they can come in from the back of your deployment zone from turn 3 onward. This guy, having this guy near a unit of Guardian Defenders to heroically intervene or whatever he wants to do is very powerful, especially if you give him the Banshee Mask, which I've found a really effective combo. So check this out. Let's say that you want to protect your backfield objective and you have this guy near the objective and you also have a unit of Guardian Defenders near it. Well, let's say your opponent wants to charge you with a 5-man unit of something, something throwaway that he thinks he can get away with, taking out your Guardians with. Well, with this guy nearby, he can heroically intervene. Because he has the fight's first ability and because it's not your turn, you will get priority with the Banshee Mask. You will attack him. You could always use fate dice to boost your chances of dealing damage. The Starglaive is pretty good. You're getting a reroll to hit and wound with it because of the Unparalleled Mastery ability. Chances are you're going to be able to take out a large amount of those models. At least 3 or 4 of them, and then the damage squad is just not really going to be able to hit back that hard against its chosen target, the Guardians, right? Your Guardians survive. They have objective control 2 each, so they'll be able to control the objective, get your extra fate dice, and the enemy unit's probably going to die in the next turn. So, Autarch Wayleaper, really good model, pretty much an auto-include in every list, and is more than just a command point per turn. Well, we have another Forge World unit on our hands. We have the Shadow Specters coming in at number 5. So the Shadow Specters were a unit that I honestly didn't even think would be good this edition. I had my reservations. I thought that maybe they were even going to move to Legends, right? But it turns out, luckily, they haven't. They're with us, and they are awesome. Another expensive Forge World unit that you probably won't be able to get, but will certainly be in most tournament lists. The reason why is because they have very versatile shooting. They have an anti-heavy infantry shot that has 3 damage at strength 6, AP -2 at 24 inches. It's pretty much gold against 3 wound targets, but is also effective against heavy infantry that have 2 wounds. Or it has a light infantry shot with blast that can deal good damage to chaff. And in a pinch, they can also deal with light vehicles pretty effectively. And by light vehicles, I mean things with toughness 6 or lower. They're very fast, they have fly, and can move 6 inches after shooting. So a cool thing to do with these guys, because they have fly and 12-inch movement, is to move them on top of ruins 6 inches up, shoot with them, and then you can use their 6-inch movement to move directly down into the ruins. And if you want to, even phantasm back out of line of sight. And this will give them that crazy plunging fire -1 AP rule against targets they hit. So heavy infantry will be extremely afraid of this unit. And all of this is only for 80 points for 5 models. So these guys are extremely cost effective. I think if these guys were more expensive, obviously they wouldn't be in this list, but because they're only 80 points, they basically have a super battle focus every turn, and they have versatile shooting against all targets that are infantry based, that is. And because of that, these are a good pick for any Eldar army. And unfortunately, I sold mine just a couple of weeks ago. About 3 weeks ago, I had a proxy unit of them from a third party, and they looked pretty awesome, but I ended up selling them due to just the fact that I didn't know how good they were going to be, or even if they were going to be in the codex, and I thought, well, I'm never going to use these, right? Oh, how wrong I was. Fate is very cruel like that. So unfortunately, I didn't read into the Strands of Fate correctly, and I was punished for it. But if you can find a unit of these, or if you already have them, they're a very excellent unit to add to your collection. And they're very strong, and they honestly won't let you down. Oh yeah, and lastly, they have stealth. So on top of it all, if somebody wants to shoot them with indirect fire and they ignore the indirect fire penalty, they will still be at -1 to hit. Okay, coming in at 4th, we have the Death Jester. So the Death Jester is a unit that I didn't fully understand when I first read it. And I thought this model was pretty good, pretty solid, but I didn't realize how good he actually was. And I didn't give him enough credit when I did my reveal. So let's talk about the Death Jester. The Death Jester has the lone operative ability, making him hard to target, which is a good ability. It's really fantastic, especially since a lot of enemy units aren't really going to be able to move within 12 inches without you phantasming out. So remember that if somebody tries to get within 12 inches of you and move within 12 inches, you can just decide, I'm just going to phantasm. You can move 7 inches back and you're out of that range, and your opponent can't do anything about it and has to shoot something else. So unless they're really, really close to you, there's just nothing the opponent can really do to shoot this guy. He can get sustained hits 3 as well, and he has some other abilities. I think he can ignore cover or get lethal hits, but the one you want to pick every turn is definitely sustained hits 3 and auto proc it with the Fate Reader enhancement, which gives him an automatic 6 after you roll the dice. So you can change one of those to a 6 to hit when he shoots. Then you can also use a Fate dice on this guy. So if you use a Fate dice and you use the Fate Reader enhancement, you can get 9 shuriken cannon shots that have devastating wounds on top of it. And he also causes battle shock to units that suffer a casualty. So this guy is an absolute beast. He can't really be shot at effectively. He has high damage against infantry targets, and he pretty much ignores armor with mortal wounds, devastating wounds when he gets it, which he probably should get a couple here and there throughout the course of the game. And when he causes damage, the units suffer battle shock. So honestly, awesome model. I really like the way the Death Jester just looks also. And because there's no more restriction on Harlequin units, you can just take this guy alone in an Eldar army and be perfectly fine. You don't have to take any other Harlequin units to get him. And for all those reasons, the Death Jester is definitely laughing his way to number 4. All right, number 3, the Wraith Knight. Now, the Wraith Knight, I have to say this right off the bat, would have been number 1 pre-nerf. If nothing had changed, this guy would have been number 1. However, because he's so expensive now, and because of the fact that Strands got nerfed considerably, the Wraith Knight is now going to come in at 3rd place. But he's still very powerful. He has massive durability, especially with Fortune. He has -1 damage and will most likely be in cover, giving you +1 to your armor save. He has insane damage with Fate Dice. Even now, you can change a Fate Dice to a 6 and get 2d6 mortal wounds on an enemy. Each heavy Wraith Cannon deals D3 shots, or has D3 attacks, I should say, and has the blast keyword, so it can get even more attacks against infantry units. It can see everything on the board due to the towering rule. Yes, it can be seen itself, but because of its massive durability, that's typically not an issue. And if your opponent does have what it takes to take this thing out, you can always put it into reserve. And I have to say, this model is extremely powerful. Even after the nerfs, it's really good. I think that you'll probably see one of these in most competitive lists just because of the fact that it can deal so many mortal wounds. So just think about it for a second. This thing with 2 heavy Wraith Cannons, which you have to take now. It's just too expensive to take any other option. And, you know, before the nerf, I was a big fan of 1 heavy Wraith Cannon and the Titanic Ghostglaive. So you could kind of mix it up a little bit, and he was cheap enough to where that was actually good. But unfortunately, with the high cost that you have to pay for him now, I think the dual Wraith Cannon is the way to go. So with dual Wraith Cannons against a unit of 5 infantry, so 5 Terminators or something like that, you're getting basically an average of 6 attacks with the Wraith Cannons, right? You're getting 4 attacks base, you're getting +2 for the blast keyword. Now out of that, you're probably going to get about 2 6s for your devastating wounds, on average, right? With Fate Dice, of course. And that's going to be 4d6 mortal wounds against a target. So 4d6 is 14 mortal wounds on average. Guess what, guys? That unit of Terminators is dead. And to finish off that squad, you can, shoot its star cannons at it, right? That is insane. So does this thing still have a place in the Eldar army? Absolutely. I think it's one of the most competitive units in the Codex, even after the heavy nerfs. All right, number 2, the Fire Prism. Was this any surprise that the Fire Prism would be up here? So I ranked the Fire Prism so high because I think it's such a versatile platform and has such heavy damage, and it is self-sufficient. So it has versatile firepower, can deal with tanks and infantry. It can shoot its focus shot through other Fire Prisms with linked fire, meaning you don't have to expose all your Fire Prisms to the enemy. It can reroll 1 hit roll and 1 wound roll on its own. This is in addition to Unparalleled Mastery, so it basically has a built-in Guide and Doom at all times, which is really good, at least when using its focus shot. And its flat 6 damage on its focus shot means it doesn't have to rely on Fate Dice. So this thing is very self-sufficient. It doesn't need Fate Dice whatsoever to operate, and I think that's really powerful, especially since Fate Dice got nerfed to 1 per phase. So if you have Fire Prisms in your army, you don't need to worry about boosting them with those dice. And on top of that, they are very fast, very maneuverable, and in the late game, they do have objective control 3, so they can easily take objectives from enemies. They have the speed to do it. So yeah, Fire Prisms, number 2, even after the nerf, they got nerfed to 150 points. I still think that's a really good cost for the Fire Prism, and I still think you're going to see 2 or 3 of these in a lot of Eldar lists. All right, so before we talk about the number 1 pick, I do want to make some honorable mentions here. I want to mention the Spirit Seer because the Spirit Seer revives 2 Wraith Infantry per round, which is extremely good, makes Wraiths even tougher than they are normally, gives +1 to hit, and lethal hits to their unit. That is absolutely incredible. The Spirit Seer is a great model to pick up if you're using a Wraith unit, and I would say if you're running a Wraith unit, you shouldn't leave home without a Spirit Seer. Pure and simple, it's one of the best support units in the Eldar Codex. The Farseer is also really good, gives -1 to wound against attacks to a friendly unit. You can put this on the Wraith Knight to make it extremely durable, and it can also change a Fate Dice to a 6 within 12. This works really well with the Wraith Knight because the Wraith Knight will probably be in the backfield, and the Farseer can just feed it 6s all game long. Fuegan is another great model. I love Fuegan. I think he's easily the best Phoenix Lord of the bunch. He can revive himself on a 2+. He can one-shot a target with 12 wounds or less because he has Melt to 6. And he has a very powerful weapon. I think it's Strength 14, AP -4, so it's very powerful indeed. Has 18 range, so if he is within 9, he's going to get that bonus Melta damage. And on top of it all, he has a solid melee profile with a good amount of AP and high damaging damage 3 attacks. The Avatar of Cain is, of course, extremely tough and has great damage. And lastly, we have the Yin Karn. So the Yin Karn is really cool because the Yin Karn can teleport. And it can teleport to any destroyed unit, friendly and enemy. And you can proc this yourself with shooting. So if you shoot an enemy unit on the other side of the battlefield, you can teleport the Yin Karn, and guess what? There is no more restriction for the Yin Karn being able to charge after they teleport. So there used to be a restriction where if you did teleport, you couldn't declare a charge that turn, which was fair in 9th edition, I think. But now what they've done is they've limited the amount of times the Yin Karn can teleport, but the Yin Karn can charge directly after it teleports. So I think this is a very powerful combo and can set up some pretty insane stuff if your opponent is not careful. And of course, the Yin Karn is very durable, just like the Avatar of Cain. Not quite as durable, but still pretty strong. And has a fantastic melee profile with really heavy damaging attacks and a good shooting attack to boot. All right, so the moment we've all been waiting for, what unit in the Eldar Index is going to take the top spot? And the top unit, in my opinion, in the Eldar Codex is... could it really be anything else but Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons? Yes, Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons, I believe, are the best unit in the Codex for a number of reasons. One, their damage is absolutely insane. Every single one of their guns has devastating wounds, has a high strength, high damage, and high AP. Whatever units they hit are going to evaporate. They're extremely tough. They have toughness 7, 2+ save. And if you attach a Spirit Seer, they're going to revive 2 models per round. So 1 during your command phase and 1 during the enemy command phase at full wounds. The unit can also, on top of it all, shoot after being attacked at range or in combat. So nowhere is safe from these guys. If you engage them in close combat, they're going to shoot you and do a bunch of devastating wounds to your unit they're engaged with. And if you shoot them at range, they're basically going to be able to target anything within 18. There is absolutely no restriction to what they can target when they're not engaged. So if you shoot them with a little small unit and you think that that's going to stop them from shooting your big unit that's also within 18, you're absolutely wrong. They can fire at whatever they want. I assume this also means they can split fire, which means they can fire at multiple different targets once those attacks are resolved. And they gain the pistol keyword, so obviously they can also shoot into combat if they need to. And all of this for only 155 points for 5 models. Guys, that's absolutely incredible. These guys used to cost 200 points per unit. And even though their weapons were strong back then, they're nowhere close to where they are in this edition. They are just utterly God mode this edition and can kill pretty much everything because they have the devastating wounds ability. Fate Reader is another great ability to put on a Spirit Seer in this unit because you can change something to an automatic 6 after you roll, meaning you're going to get even more devastating wounds out of it. And lastly, if you throw Fortune onto a big unit of these guys, they're pretty much unkillable. And that's what a lot of players are doing. They're running 10 of these guys. They're running a Farseer behind with Guardians, throwing Fortune on these guys turn 1. The Wraith Guard are moving up. They're advancing. They're going 11 inches into the midboard. And then they're just basically saying, yes, shoot me so that I can shoot you back for free. Very strong unit. And I'm actually surprised that they didn't get nerfed. And guys, yes, they did not get touched with the nerf bat. So that tells me that they're going to be pretty strong at least until September when they do a points update. So yeah, Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons are number 1 in my book. Let me know in the comment section what you think is the best Eldar unit and why. And if you generally agree or disagree with the units I picked for this list. I'm really curious to know the community's take on the Eldar Codex and which units they think are the best. Okay, so in conclusion, those are my top 10 Eldar units in 10th edition. But I have to say, there are so many Eldar units in the Eldar Index that are very powerful and very good. And we're close to making the list themselves. Even the honorable mentions You know, I only mentioned a couple of those, but there were several others in the codex that I also wanted to bring up because I thought they were so good. The Falcon is a great unit. The Warwalker almost made it into the list. That's a great unit as well. Probably a tad too expensive for what it is in comparison with the Hornet, but still a very good model. Dire Avengers, of course, are very good, as well as Fire Dragons. I know a lot of people don't like Fire Dragons because we have such great anti-tank options right now, like Fire Prisms and things like that. But Fire Dragons are a great option, and I think they're probably more of just a light target killer now, right? Instead of a heavy target killer. They can kill heavy targets, by the way, but they're probably better off killing lighter targets on the flanks and things like this. I actually ran a unit the other day against a Chaos Space Marine player, and he was trying to sneak a Forge Fiend up the flank around a ruin, and I dropped 5 Fire Dragons out of a Falcon, and they were able to melt it pretty easily with the support of the Falcon. And they're also able to hide afterward because of, you know, Phantasm. There's nothing preventing you from Phantasming even after you've disembarked and shot and all that in your opponent's movement phase. So I'm really digging the Eldar Index overall, and I think we actually really lucked out, guys, I have to say. I think for the most part, the Codex looks really strong. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about the Index in general. Obviously, only positive vibes here. I know some of you might be a little upset about the lack of options, and so am I. I was upset to see Exarch powers go. I was upset to see a lot of the cooler, more intricate rules go away. Hopefully these will return with the Eldar Codex when it comes out, but this is just the way I think about it. When Eldar had an index in previous editions, it was pretty much just as bare bones. I think the index that came out previous to this one in the last couple of editions was actually pretty bare bones like this as well. It didn't have Exarch powers, if my memory serves me correctly. So that's actually something they had to add in later. Again, my memory may be a little bit hazy on that. But in general, indexes are pretty toned down as far as the options go, and I think we're going to see a return of more options and things like that when the Eldar Codex proper comes out. So don't worry, those things will probably return in time. But for now, the index is looking pretty good, and I've had a lot of fun playing it, I have to say. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons and supporters, by the way, who have helped the channel over the last months. Your support is greatly appreciated. And if you do want to donate or support on Patreon, I'll go ahead and leave my links in the description for those of you who do. And again, your help is greatly appreciated for improving the channel. I'll also leave my store link in the description for you guys in case you're interested in looking at some Eldar inspired apparel. I have a bunch of Eldar inspired apparel using the Eldar runes, which I think you'll find kind of cool and a great way to represent your favorite faction. So the next video I want to also bring out for you guys is one centered on Wraiths. Look forward to that. We're going to be talking about Wraith armies in 10th edition and how viable they are and also how to build them. And I have to say right off the bat, just a little bit of a sneak peek on my opinion of it. Wraith armies are probably one of the strongest ways to run Eldar in 10th edition. After the nerfs, I ran my Wraith army again, and it was still awesome. I had to cut a few things, obviously, because the Wraith Knight increased in points. But it's still very effective and functions very well on the tabletop. All right, everybody, I'm going to leave you guys off with that. Have a great one. Peace out, and see you guys in the next video.